Survey research is very different to experimental research. Experimental research, just like survey research, is a research strategy. Researcher begins similarly to survey research. So the researcher defines the population, selects the cases to be studied. Subjects are then assigned to different groups. So this is very different to survey research, where there's no intervention or attempt to change the conditions of the participants. In experimental research, one group receives an intervention and the other group does not. So having a control group is essential in experimental research design. The results are then compared, with the aim being to identify an outcome or effect of the intervention being studied. So there are some critical differences between experimental research, which involves a manipulation of the independent variable, and survey design. There are several ethical considerations in designing research, particularly where there is an intervention applied to a group of participants. Questions to be asked is, who benefits from the research? And this is a critical question, particularly when you're researching vulnerable populations. Informed consent. So you must have the full disclosure to participants. Sorry, I didn't write these slides. The participants must be aware of what's involved in the research and the risks of participating in research prior to agreeing to do so. Protection of participants. You must minimize the long-term adverse effects of having a participant in your research. You must attempt to minimize discomfort. This notion of community values must be reflected in sensitive research. So community values in, for instance, research conducted with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander adults is critical. And research will not be passed through an ethics research committee unless it is reflecting community values of, for instance, participation, equity, and voice. And also, finally, conservation of resources, prevented by good planning. So these are some ethical considerations that come up when conducting research. In this final section of today's lecture, we're going to talk briefly about sampling methods in research. So sampling is the process by which we select participants to engage in research. So when you're conducting research, you typically identify a population of interest. For instance, my population of interest in my PhD is trans and gender diverse adults. So the target group that the researcher is interested in. So the population is the target group that the researcher is interested in. And in the example that I just gave, it is adults who identify as trans and gender diverse. Populations can be individuals, they can be groups, they can be human, animal, objects, or an event. So the population it's not specific to humans only. That's important to identify. And it's the entire set of the above that is intended to be studied. Okay, sampling. The thing about trying to study a population is that it's impracticable to study every single member of that population. For instance, I'm interested in the experiences of trans and gender diverse adults who live in regional and rural Victoria. It's impracticable for me to identify every single adult who identifies as trans and gender diverse and to meet with them within the time frame of a PhD, which is 3 years. So instead of trying to do that, what we do is we select a subset of the population. So here it's depicted pictorially. So here is the entire population, so every case of that particular demarcated population, and then we just select 3 people from it. The idea is that these 3 people are representative of the population. So they have several key characteristics of the population of interest. So for me, this population is the population of trans and gender diverse adults who live in regional and rural Victoria. And the 3 people who I've selected to meet with are trans and gender diverse and live in rural and regional Victoria. So the principle of selecting people who are representative of the population is that we are then able to generalize from the sample back to the entire population. There are several different types of sampling methods. There's convenience sampling, quota sampling, random sampling, area sampling. Now, what I'd like you to do as an example of identifying sampling methods and also considering alternate forms of sampling methods is to return to the original article that we introduced at the start of this lecture. So the Dowers et al. 2020 article, Virtually Trans. And I want you to answer 3 questions. Firstly, what kind of sampling was used in this research? The second question is, what are the limitations of this type of sampling? And remember before I mentioned that there's a section in the discussion called limitations. So perhaps start there as perhaps a shortcut to answering this question. And this final question is a bit tricky, and I want you to think critically about this and demonstrate your understanding of sampling methods more broadly in answering it. What other forms of sampling could have been employed in this particular research? Okay, so this concludes the content of the week 1 lecture material. But what I'd like you to do is to spend the time that you have remaining in today's allocated class time to starting to work on your health science researcher first assessment piece, the evidence summary. Please see the links under week 1 for this. So in terms of specific outcomes or what I hope to see next time we meet, I'd like to see you choose a health topic that is of interest to you, something that you're passionate about, something that you can spend some time exploring. And I want you to find one relevant, peer-reviewed academic journal article. Okay, so I will leave you with this task until we meet again. Bye for now.